Okay, here I am again. It's time to get trippy. We're going to talk about Alan Watts today. So let me see if I can find my clicker. Alan Watts is heavily or was heavily influenced by Eastern tradition like Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, the Zen traditions. And so he wanted to make this more palpable, more digestible for the Westerners over here. So he kind of brought a lot of this to mainstream, society in the West. And when I talk about Alan Watts, one of the things that I have to talk about is he's a big tripper, and that's why I like talking about him because, like, I've done a lot of LSD too, and he's very explicit about his journeys on LSD and other kind of psychedelics, and he talks about them as psychedelic tools. And in another lecture, I'll get into these tools. Okay, so one of the ideas I agree with, because I've done so much tripping, is pantheism, that God is just the summation of every single thing in the universe. All the leaves and trees and rivers and streams and planets and stars, they all come together in this pantheistic way. And so God is the ultimate chi or energy force in the universe. And I think he has it down here, the universal energy field. Okay, so this is another quote. He says, if someone brought up in a Christian house says, I am God, then we're going to go commit them to the loony bin. But in India, when you say, I am God, they say, finally, you just found out. And so I'll get back into this later on. I want to talk about namaste because that's kind of the underpinning of the term or in the word namaste. So two problems he has with Western perception. I'm going to get to these two problems. They're very easy, but I can't show all the videos I normally show in my class, but this video is one of the problems he says, or this is the problem with Western society or the problem with America. So here's the video coming up.
Why is it that we don't seem to be able to adjust ourselves to the physical environment without destroying it? Why is it that in a way this culture represents in a unique fashion the law of diminishing returns, that our success is a failure, that we are building up, in other words, an enormous technological civilization which seems to promise the fulfillment of every wish almost at the touch of a button. And yet, as in so many fairy tales, when the wishes finally materialize, they're like fairy gold. They're not really material at all. In other words, so many of our products, our cars, our homes, our clothing, our food, it looks as if it were really the instant creation of pure thought. That is to say, it is thoroughly insubstantial, lacking in what the connoisseur of wine calls body. And in so many other ways, the riches that we produce are ephemeral. And as a result of that, we're frustrated. We're terribly frustrated. We feel that the only thing is to go on getting more and more. And as a result of that, the whole landscape begins to look like the nursery of a spoiled child who's got too many toys and is bored with them and throws them away as fast as he gets them, plays them for a few minutes. Also, we're dedicated to a tremendous war on the basic material dimensions of time and space. We want to obliterate their limitations. We want to get everything done as fast as possible. We want to convert the rhythms and the skills of work into cash, which indeed you can buy something with, but you can't eat it. And then rush home to get away from work and begin the real business of life, to enjoy ourselves. You know, for the vast majority of American families, what seems to be the real point of life, what you rush home to get to, is to watch an electronic reproduction of life. You can't touch it. It doesn't smell, and it has no taste. You might think that people getting home to the real point of life in a robust material culture would go home to a colossal banquet or an orgy of lovemaking or a riot of music and dancing. But nothing of the kind. It turns out to be this purely passive contemplation of a twittering screen. You see mile after mile of darkened houses with that little electronic screen flickering in the room. Everybody isolated, watching this thing, and thus in no real communion with each other at all. And this isolation of people into a private world of their own is really the creation of a mindless crowd. And so we don't get with each other, except for public expressions of getting rid of our hostility, like football or prize fighting. And even in the spectacles one sees on this television, it's perfectly proper to exhibit people slugging and slaying each other, but oh dear no, not people loving each other, except in a rather restrained way. One can only draw the conclusion that the assumption underlying this is that expressions of physical love are far more dangerous than expressions of physical hatred. And it seems to me that a culture that has that sort of assumption is basically crazy and devoted. Unintentionally indeed, but nevertheless in fact devoted, not to survival, but to the actual destruction of life.
Okay, I really love the part of the movie where he talks about we have to rush home because we have this important business, which is to sit our big fat ass on a couch and watch TV and not talk to anybody else. But we could get into that in another lecture. Okay, one of the problems he has with Western perception is called words. Now that sounds weird, but let me get my clicker here. I have this on here. We tend to just label everything. I'm a boy, you're a girl, I'm white, you're black. Whatever it is, we are always labeling and separating people into not just people, but the whole world. That's a tree, that's a house, that's a goat. And so when we do this, we start to confuse words with reality. And the most, or the best example of this, I should say, is the word God. Because we could have said God is iceberg or something, you know what I mean? But we fight over this. God, Allah, we talked about this with the Abraham Maslow stuff, I think. And now, so he says we can't see interconnectedness. He's all about interconnectedness, and this is why I love him, pantheism, interconnectedness, how God is everything. And so if we kind of label everything, we get into this, what I call, and I think I have this on here, decognition, where we can't see how everything is a part of everything else. We talked about this with earlier when I was talking about Maslow. That's right, is B cognition and B love versus decognition and D love. Okay, so we get into this endless taxonomy, back to this idea where we kind of do an autopsy of God, because if God is the summation of everything, we go, well, this is Earth and that's Mars, and it's like, yeah, but God is everything. You don't go around saying, this is my foot and this is my, humerus and this is my radius and ulna. It's like, no, you just say I'm Tim or whoever you are. So he said to do this autopsy. And so from Gestalt psychology, if you had any exposure to it, they say we should focus on the whole, and the whole is more than the sum of its parts, which is the same idea. We don't just do this endless taxonomy. And so we have this adage from popular culture, we can't see the forest for the trees. We're so busy counting trees, we don't know we're in a forest. And we do the same thing with God. God's right in front of our face, but we're on this endless taxonomy of separating reality into discrete parts instead of seeing it as a continuous whole. And so the second problem, hopefully that first problem made sense, is our ego. I think is a problem in every single religion, but we tend to separate not only everything into parts, but this is me, Tim, and then there's everything else out there. I talk about this with Piaget. And so he says this. This is a weird, trippy quote. You know he's done some acid when you look at this quote. We're like a separate ego enclosed in a bag of skin. And so he says our skin is like a barrier between us and the universe. And we're always saying, there's where the universe starts. I extricated myself from the universe, and you can't ever extricate yourself from the universe. Just like, we can't, take, an animal or a plant out of its environment. It's always going to be a part of it. So we start to confuse ourselves with our label. My name is Tim, but it could have been House. It could have been anything. Would that change the spirit or essence of which I am? I don't think it would. I call it the tapestry trip. This is the thing that I personally talk about for years. I could run around saying I'm a yellow thread and you're a magenta thread or you're a turquoise thread if you see these different colors on here. But if we look at the tapestry as a whole, that's what's important. But if we start holding up our thread and say, look, I'm special. Yeah, all the threads are special. Get over it. Get over yourself. Get over your ego, because we're all interconnected. And if you could see the pattern of interconnectedness, this is why acid will do this for you. Mushrooms, all kinds of stuff will show you the interconnectedness of this tapestry trip. Okay, so he calls it the ego illusion. I'm a thread. Okay, yeah, but really you're a thread that's a part of a tapestry, and so it's an illusion that you have a self. Okay, I don't know if y'all like Fight Club. I love Fight Club. You are not special. You're not beautiful, unique, snowflake, so on and so forth. Bill Hicks was a big time tripper, and he died early on. He was a stand-up comedian back in the 80s. And he says this: today, a young man on acid realized that all matter is merely energy condensed to a slow vibration, that we are all one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. There's no such thing as death. Life is only a dream, and we're only the imagination of ourselves. I love this because, like, if you're a tripper, you know exactly what he's talking about, but everybody takes themselves way too seriously. Ram Dass says this: the game is not about becoming somebody, it's about becoming nobody. Okay, so he also says, I try to control me. I'm always having these talks with myself. It's like, well, I should do better. Who's saying I should do better? Because there's only one person in here. So I'm have this schizophrenic moment where I'm going to make Tim behave. It's like, but who's making Tim behave? Isn't there just one Tim? I don't know if this makes sense to you. And not only do we try to control ourselves, I'm going to do better. I'm going to stop getting angry and stop doing this or being depressed. We try to control and conquer the universe. And so this is undaoistic. It's not the woo way. We're not going with the flow like the Taoists would say. So one of the big things, especially from Christianity, is like there's a me and there's God up there. And so that's kind of a weird idea and may seem blasphemous to you, but Alan Watts says that you are a part of God. Oops, sorry about that. I kicked my stand there. And so I'm going to start to talk about how to solve these problems, or his solution to solve these problems, on the next few slides. Okay, so one of the things he says that we have to get over this problem that we've been talking about, or these problems, is the realization of relatedness. And I'm going to get into this in more detail. But basically, we do have this differentiated system of things. We label everything, divide the universe into parts, including ourself and the environment are different. But he says unless we get over that notion that we're not that we're discrete and not interconnected, that we'll never, fully come into what we're supposed to be. And I love this quote about hermits. This is why I go hiking alone all the time, because if I get way off into the desert about 5:30 in the morning and get real quiet, just like it says on this quote, then you have the spiritual moment. Not when you're just walking around the trail talking about what you're going to do at the Home Depot this weekend. It's like I like to get into the desert, get real quiet, and I understand this because I've been into the desert and the woods tripping so many times. Okay, so back to our bodies. Just like I have all these cells and organs in my body, I could like label them in all these different ways. Um, we're kind of like cells of a larger organism. I don't go around saying, this is my ulna and this is my radius and Tim's, humerus and this, that, and the other. And I'm not doing a very good job on anatomy, but this is Tim's eyeball or Tim's ear, his pinna. I don't label myself in this way. I just label myself as a whole, an integrated whole. And this is what he says we should do about the universe. And we're like the cells, the pieces that make up God. We're not God per se, but we are like the drops of water in an endless ocean that's making up God. Okay, so this realization of relatedness has to come through usually a mystical experience, which would be like they say a moment of clarity. Something happens to you, and doesn't mean you have to do drugs, but something happens to you where it shakes your world and you see how you're interconnected with everything in the world. Okay, so the last two, it seems like you had two and two and two, but anyway, these are the two parts of the mystical experience, which means two things that happen to you whenever you have a mystical, trippy time. The first thing I've been talking about the whole time, you gain cosmic consciousness. What does that mean? You see the universe just as it is, all interconnected, and this is what Abraham Maslow would call B cognition, not D cognition, where you see it disconnected and I'm all separate from everything else. And so my friend Tia Bruised is always saying you got to like connect. Connecting is the key, because I've disconnected and become an island, and that's not a way to live. No man is an island. And so, anyway, when you have these experiences, there's no way to disconnect yourself from the universe, just like a tree can't disconnect from the forest. The second thing is you remember your true self. You have these aha moments. Most of the time, I identify with my false self, my Timness. It's like, but in these moments, I was like, oh, my spiritual self. Like when I was at the church the Peyote way, it's like, oh, yes, you know what I mean? It's like I identify with, I know who I am. Or when I was on ketamine, it's like I was saying, I am Timothy, and people were in the next room going, what are you saying? It's like, I know who I am. You know what I mean? And it's like, it's weird because I had to identify with my false self. It's like, oh, I'm not that good, and this, that, and the other. And that's the worldly self, the secular self. That's not who you are. Your spirit is like beautiful, it's eternal. And so in these moments, I realize that I am everything, and that's the moment I need to have right now. In Hinduism, they have a name for your true self. We've talked about it before. It's called Atman. Atman self. And so Ravi has this like beautiful saying because he goes back to Christianity. He says in Christianity, if I can get my pen to work right here, Yahweh means I am. It doesn't mean I am this or I am that. I am Tim, I'm white, I'm male, I'm American, I'm whatever. It means I am, exist. And so Ram Dass says this is the thing. The dance goes from realizing you're separate. We separate ourselves here when we're born. But then you're trying to find your way back home. Finding your way back, that's the hardest part, you know what I mean? And so in Hindu myth, there's two things I want you to see. At first, you forget your divinity right here. You forget who you are. But when you have trippy time, like you go, oh yes, I never feel unconfident when I'm on a trip. It's like, just get out of my way. I'm going to go climb a mountain. I'm not going to get lost. I'm at the most supreme that I can be. And so I don't know if you watched Avatar, but if you split it right down the middle, on this side over here, I'm glad I can do the pen. It's like he could get confused that he was this blue guy, but he's really on the bed. He's really that guy. That's his true self. So over here is, his Atman. If I can write this down. And then you can't read that at all. And this is his like ego. And this is what we do in everyday life. Okay, so Scott, the guy that made Dilbert came up with this like book, and it's really neat because there's this delivery guy. He's trying to deliver a package to Atman, Atman. I don't want to try to write again right now, getting used to my stylus. But anyway, when he gets there, he starts asking this guy questions, and he asks him all these different questions like, well, does God get bored? He goes, yeah, he did get bored at one time, and he blew himself up, and that's called the Big Bang. And so he blew himself up into a million little pieces that are disintegrating, expanding into space, but then maybe at one time they'll come back together and condense back down. You can talk to scientists that are smarter than me about quantum physics about this. But anyway, we're all the debris. We're all the pieces. So God is playing hide and seek with himself, and so he's blown himself up into all these you can't see little puzzle pieces that I have missing over here, and we all get confused like, who are you? Who are you? And it's like, oh, we're pieces of God. And so when we say namaste, what we're doing is reminding each other. The God that lives within me is reminding you that we're both the same cells of a larger organism. Booyah! It's namaste time. And so the God in me is saying hi to the God in you. I love this picture. And so this is what we have within us, everything, but we forget it. And so we look without us. One of my Korean friends said this. One time God was getting really mad at everybody praying to him, kind of like on Bruce Almighty. So he decided to go and hide, and he tried to pick the best place he could ever hide. And where did he hide? Right here in your heart, because he knew that you would always be looking somewhere else. Where's God? Where's God? Like one time I heard this guy go to me, he goes, I was going on a job interview, and he goes, don't forget to bring God with you. And it's like, yeah, but when I get there, won't God be there? Like, God is everywhere. He's right here. He's in your heart chakra. Enough about that. From Christian myth, Jesus does the same thing. He sheds his divinity and becomes a common man. This is the whole thing that the Nicene Council and all this other stuff has been about, about was he really a man? Was he really divine? This, that, and the other. But then there's this moment on the cross. He has this moment of peak separation where he goes, God, what have you done? And then he goes, forgive them for they know not what they do. He steps into his heart chakra. This is when he becomes the fucking hero. Okay, so he forgot his divinity. He remembered it. Even in the Garden of Gethsemane, he forgets it right here, and then he remembers it again. It's awesome. So we incarnate as a separate ego. We forget our divinity, but we have these moments of our true self. I love this picture. You see it right here, this one. But anyway, we have those moments of our true self. I got to be good about not going crazy with my pen now. Okay, so last little thing to wrap it up, but I really could talk about all this all day, is dividing and labeling. What do? We tend to divide the world, even into evil and good, but from a Taoistic perspective, nothing is evil and nothing is good. Really, the worst day of my life is the best day. When I got the shit beat out of me in Peru and got left for dead, that's the day I started changing my life. And I've had a lot of other days like that, and you can't take those days back from me. Because see, evil and good is our perspective. Our real blessings often come to us, and I don't want to start crying, but in the shape of pain, loss, and disappointment. It's all that shitty stuff that happened to you that one day is going to make you shine. It's going to make you shine. And so what the caterpillar calls the end of the world is what the master calls the butterfly. And so if you're feeling like a caterpillar right now, kind of like I am, just remember there's a butterfly coming. And I don't know if you've ever seen this movie, but you should go out and watch it right now, The Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Because nothing's really ever good or bad. You can't really ever erase all the bad without erasing all the good. I'm sorry for being so emotional, but this is who I am. Y'all know me. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. I'll talk to you soon. Okay, bye.